Welcome learners to this session on organizational structure. In the previous session, we learned about the concept of organization and we also discussed various theories of organization, including the classical view, neoclassical view, and the modern views. The learning objectives of this session are, at the end of this session, you will be able to understand why organization structures are important, the concept and importance of organizational chart. We will also discuss about the components of organizational structure and what are the various types of organizational structure that exist. But first, let us understand why do we need an organizational structure. Dear students, we need organizational structure because the relationships within the organization have to be established between various components or the departments of the organization. Further, work has to be divided among different members or the departments of organization. Structure also helps to specify the authority, responsibility, powers, duties, functions, etc., which are to be clearly spelled out. Organizational structure also helps such in a way that activities have to be coordinated effectively and the actions of the members have to be monitored or controlled. The concept of organizational chart is very important, which helps you to understand what a structure is. The student's organizational chart basically shows the structure of the organization. It is the diagram that displays the reporting or the relationship hierarchy. An organizational chart can be useful in a number of ways. Number one, it depicts the work responsibilities and also the reporting relationships. It allows the leadership to more effectively manage the growth and change. It also allows employees to better understand how their work fits in the overall organizational scheme. It also helps to improve the lines of communication. And finally, it creates a visual employee directory. So by looking at the organizational chart, you can visualize where do you stand, who are you reporting to, who are people reporting to you, and what is the overall hierarchy within the organizational structure. So any organizational structure is based on the following things. Number one, it is based on specialization. We also discussed about the concept of division of work. So that specialization is very important. Number two, it depends upon standardization. In other words, whatever are the laid policies and procedures that should be reflected there. The structure is further based on the concept of formalization. In other words, to the extent to which policies and procedures are written down. And finally, on the basis of centralization, which means what is the authority of the decision maker. So while developing the organizational structure, any organization should aim to understand what are the various components of the structure and think on those components before deciding the organizational structure. The first issue that needs to be deliberated upon is the issue of complexity. Now, what is complexity? It basically is the degree to which the activities within the organization are broken up or differentiated. So, which means that if the nature of activities are very different, obviously the complexity would be higher. Second issue that needs to be really thought upon is the formalization issue. Now this is basically the degree to which rules and procedures are utilized in the process of decision making. And finally, the third issue that we will be focusing is the issue of centralization. Now this basically means where the decision making authority actually lies. Is it at the top management or everybody in the organization has certain amount of authority with them in order to take the decision. So let us start with the issue of complexity. Now in the issue of complexity, differentiation can take place in three different forms. The first is what we call as the horizontal differentiation. Now what is the horizontal differentiation basically considers? It considers the degree of separation between different units in the structure. If the organization really needs diverse kind of people with specialized knowledge and skills, obviously the horizontal complexity of the organization increases. The second possibility can be vertical differentiation. Now, vertical differentiation basically refers to the depth of the organizational hierarchy. In other words, it also looks at the number of levels which exist between the top management and the operations. If the organization is really complex, as the number of levels between the topmost management and the middle management and the lower management increases, the vertical differentiation increases. For any organization which is present at multiple locations, for example, a hotel which is present in America, which is present in India, which is present in Australia, the spatial differentiation concepts come into place. This concept basically encompasses the degree to which the location of organizational physical facilities and personnel are geographically dispersed. So higher dispersion would obviously also bring into the spatial differentiation. The second component is about the formalization. Now, as I said, formalization basically refers to the degree to which the jobs within the organization are standardized. If the jobs are standardized, there has to be a clear-cut procedure, formalities and procedures established for any particular job role. Now, the first possibility there can be high level of formalization. When the job incumbent has minimum amount of discretion over what is to be done, when it is to be done, how he or she should do it, that becomes the high formalization procedure. For example, in a travel agency, for example, an employee is looking after the visa processing or getting the passport forms completed of the clients. Now, there are set procedures for this. In that case, the employee does not have enough flexibility, or he is not supposed to apply enough creativity in order to complete the task. The second possibility can be, for example, where low formalization is needed. Now, this is generally applicable whenever the job behavior is relatively non-programmed and the employees have a great deal of freedom to exercise discretion in the work. For example, let us take the example of a travel guide. Now, when a travel guide is going with a client to a particular monument, he has to exercise his own discretion and ensure that whatever is the guest or whatever is the tourist expecting, he or she has to perform in accordance with the expectation. Though there are certain set procedures, but employee still has the flexibility, and therefore we call it as a low formalization case. The third issue that we raised was the issue of centralization. Now, what is centralization? Centralization basically refers to the degree to which decision making is concentrated at a single point in the organization. And this includes the concept of formal authority, that is, the rights which are inherent in one's position. There are two possibilities which the organizations can think of. First, it can be a centralized organization or what we call as the decentralized organization. Now, centralized organization will be one where the entire power is controlled by, say for example, few people, the top management people. Whereas a decentralized organization will be one where the power actually percolates down to various people in the organization. There have been various discussions that why decentralized organizations are beneficial. There are various benefits of this. Number one, in a decentralized organization, actions can be taken more quickly. Further, more people get involved in the decision-making process, and obviously the employees also feel less alienated, right? So in a tourism organization, dear students, a decentralized setup is always very good, because when you give authority to people that whenever they are talking to their clients or other people, other stakeholders, they have enough authority to take decisions on behalf of the organization. Otherwise, if the entire process is centralized, there could be a possibility that the frontline staff, for example, in a hotel, there is a customer who comes with a particular complaint and he approaches the front office guy. Now, if the front office guy does not have the authority to resolve the complaint, there is a possibility that the customer might feel dissatisfied. So therefore, there are advantages of decentralized organization, but the top management has to decide that how much authority and responsibility is to be given. Now, what are the various ways in which the organizational structures can be classified? There are various options that are available. Number one, what we call as the mechanistic structure. A mechanistic structure versus the organic structure. Now let us first look at the issues about mechanistic structure. Number one, a mechanistic structure of the organization will always have high degree of complexity. There would be high formalization. There would be a limited information network, right? In the sense that the information will flow either from top to bottom or bottom to the top. And because of this high formalization, there would be little participation by the members which are lower in the hierarchy, and they will not feel participated. Whereas as compared to the mechanistic structure, if we look at the organic structure, organic structure will always be low in complexity. There would be relatively lower formalization, and the information network will be very comprehensive. This is very interesting. The information will not only flow top to the bottom or bottom to the top, but there would also be horizontal flow of information, which at times is very good in terms of improving the effectiveness of the organization. And in the organic structures, because of the low formalization and free flow of information, the employees feel that they are participating in the decision making process. So based on this, there are various types of organizational structure that you can actually think of. So number one, what we call as the functional based structure. The second possibility is you can have a product or service based structure. The third possibility is what we call as the spatial based structure. For a large organization, we can have conglomerate based structure. And finally, the another popular form of structure which exists is what we call as the matrix structure. Now let us look at what is the difference between all these structures. So first, let us look at the diagram which is there on the slide. It basically talks of the functional based structure. Generally, this type of structure is one of the very popular structures across the organizations. And any organization which is relatively smaller in size, or whether it is a large organization, a functional based structure would be such that, for example, if you see the picture, there is a person at the top. He or she could be the chief executive officer of the organization. And then further down the line, what you do, you divide the work, create the organizational structure way that different departments are created. For example, a travel agency could have a department like marketing. They could have a separate accounts and finance department. There could be a reservation department. There could be a marketing department, and so on. So this type of structure has its own advantages and disadvantages. The number one advantage of the functional based structure is that it really helps to divide the work in such a way that the work given to a particular department or an employee really gets implemented in a better way. Whereas, as the organization grows, at times it can also become a problem for the organization as people start to believe living in their own silos. For example, somebody who is in HR would say that marketing is not my job, or somebody who is given the job of reservations would say that I am not really interested to talk to the customer. So for a small organization, though functional based structures really help, but then there can also be disadvantages. So people should actually be trained to perform multiple functions. Or somebody who is trained to perform multiple functions can really contribute to all the departments of the organization. The next structure that we will be now discussing is what we call as the product based structure. It is also known as the service based structure, or it is also called as the divisional based structure. Now this type of structure is generally, if you look at the figure which is given on this slide, this type of structure is basically based on different divisions of the corporation. So this normally happens when the organization really grows big, right? So you are into multiple operations. For example, a company which is into travel business, tourism business, creates one vertical which is exclusively for hotels, create another vertical which is exclusively looking for the reservations. There is another vertical which is exclusively looking for transportation. There is another vertical which could be looking into some other business which is part of the entire tourism business. So there are various advantages, dear students, as far as the divisional based structure is concerned. The first advantage that this kind of structure really gives is it helps the organization to meet the customer needs. Because when customers are looking for different kind of products or services. They specialize, each department specialize into their own division. They have their own team which takes care of those specific issues, and hence they are able to meet the customer needs effectively. The second advantage that this kind of structure provides is it focuses on specific market segments. So for example, as we saw in the previous slide, if you have a transportation division separately, it is exclusively looking for the needs of the tourist which are related to transportation. Similarly, if you look at the hotel, they are responding to focusing on specific issues of that particular segment. The third benefit of this structure is that it really helps the organization to respond to market changes. As recently we saw that because of COVID, the entire tourism and hospitality industry really got affected. But organizations like Airbnb, for example, Airbnb specialized into peer-to-peer accommodation. They were the first company that they responded really well to the crisis because of the COVID. And they came up with the concept of online experiences. So this is only possible when you have this kind of structure. Also, this kind of structure gives you an advantage that you can actually go and measure the performance of each division independently. But dear students, there are certain disadvantages as well. For example, the number one disadvantage is it actually duplicates the function resources. As you must have seen in the previous figure, each division would need same kind of people. So what you are actually doing is you are duplicating the resources of the organization. The second disadvantage can be there can be rivalry among divisions. So you are basically creating a sense of competition between them, and that competition can actually be detrimental to the overall growth of the organization. The third disadvantage which can actually exist because of the structure is there could always be the comparison between divisional versus the organizational goal. So if a corporate has its own goal, the division will only stick to the goal of its own division without thinking too much about what other divisions are thinking. So this can actually act very detrimentally in the long run for the organization. And obviously there is a lack of central control. So if any organization which believes in centralization of power would always feel there is a problem in this. Another form of structure is what we call as the spatial based structure. So dear students, this spatial based structure is generally applicable in case of a multinational organization. For example, a hotel which operates in America, which operates in Europe, which operates in Africa, which operates in Asia and Australia would have different divisions altogether, right? So what they will do is they would geographically divide the organization into various regions, we can say, various countries, we can say. Not necessarily any organization which is a multinational would have this. Even a domestic organization could, for example, divide the entire country into multiple regions. And each region would have its own specific team reporting to the centralized team. So these spatial based organizations are generally needed whenever the organization goes into multiple geographical areas or multiple territories. The reason why these structures are important is because each region could have its own peculiar characteristics, which probably the central team might not be able to understand. For example, McDonald's operating in Australia versus McDonald's operating in India. The consumption patterns are different. If you have a centralized marketing team, they will not really appreciate what kind of food consumption patterns exist in India as compared to, for example, China. So therefore, these kind of structures come quite handy in that case. Next, we come on to what we call as the conglomerate organizational structure. This kind of structure is generally adopted by organizations which are into multiple businesses, right? Remember, this is different from what we discussed earlier in terms of divisional based structure or spatial based structure. Now the issue comes that there is a large corporate. For example, we know ITC Group, for example. ITC is into hotels, but ITC is also into other businesses. Similarly, Tata Group, for example, you look at the case of Tata Group. Tata is into hotels. Tata is also into making steel. Tata is also into airlines. So in that case, conglomerate organizations are basically those large corporations which have multiple revenue streams coming from business activities that are completely unrelated to each other. So these conglomerate-based structures come quite handy there. Now, what is the advantage of this? The advantage is that each kind of business would need a different skill set, right? So the marketing team looking after hotels might not be competent enough to look at the marketing issues of a chemical business, or for example, in telecom business. So in these cases, conglomerate-based structures come quite handy. And finally, we will be looking at the matrix-based organizations. Dear students, you just look at the figure which is on the left hand side. The matrix organization structure is basically a combination of two or more different kind of organizational structures. Now in this case, what really happens is there is a project and there is a functional team, right? So organizations, what they do, they involve project management and functional management simultaneously. So this is basically composed of both hierarchy of management, where employees are managed by a functional manager as well as an additional project manager. Now this is very interesting, right? So let me give you an example to explain that how this entire system really works. For example, there is a functional department, reservations, right? And there are different project management teams. For example, somebody who is looking at the inbound tourism, there is the other team which is looking at the outbound tourism. Now, these teams would have their own different projects looking at different group of tourists coming to your country or going out of the country. They would have similar needs in terms of reservation. So what they do, both these teams would approach the person who is looking at the reservation part, and this team, the functional team, the reservation team, would be supporting both these project managers. So this kind of structure really helps the organization in various ways. Let us look at what are the various advantages of the matrix-based structure. The first advantage of the structure is it really helps in building a strong collaboration between departments. Second, it combines project and functional management structure, which is an advantage because now you try to optimize the resources. Number three, it allows interdepartmental communication. So there is no conflict of resources, rather the kind of cohesiveness really gets built in. And when employees start working in various different projects, so this gives an opportunity for them to develop new skills, and they start learning new skills, which comes to the advantage of the organization at the launch. And finally, team members and managers keep their functional role, which really goes into long-term motivation in the long run. However, this structure also has certain disadvantages. Now let us see what are the various disadvantages of this structure. Number one, the managerial roles may not be clearly defined. So there is a possibility that managers might get confused. They really do not know that what kind of project they are working on, though their functional clarity is there. But then, because with every changing project their roles changes, so there could be a confusion. Number two, team roles may not be clearly defined, right? Because now every time a person has to work in a new team, so he has to look for compatibility issues. He has to understand whether he will be really getting fit into that particular team or not. The third issue of this is the decision-making process can be slowed down. So there is a risk that because you have to now approach two different kind of people, it can be really slowed down. And too much of work can actually cause overload among employees. So a person who is working in project A, project B, project C might think that he is being used too much, and this kind of workload can actually be detrimental to the performance of the organization. And finally, one of the major disadvantages of this can turn out to be it is very difficult to measure the employee performance, as the employee is now working in multiple projects, and it becomes difficult to measure the performance of the employee. So with this, students, let's conclude today's session. In this session, we have discussed about that why organizational structures are important. We also discussed about what do we mean by organizational chart, what is the concept and importance. We discussed various components of organizational structure and related that how they are to be decided upon. And at the end, we discussed the various types of organizational structure which can be created in the organization. Thank you.